Okay, hello everyone. Welcome. Thank you for coming. I'm going to use the mic here tonight. I'm feeling a little scratchy, so you'll have to forgive me for that. But thank you for coming out. My name is Brian McLean. I'm the manager of public programs here at the Eli and Edith Broad Art Museum. We're very happy to have you and very happy to have our esteemed guests tonight, our guest speakers, Michele and Robert Root-Bernstein. So tonight's event is inspired by our current exhibition, Matter Matters, Bridging Research in the Arts and Sciences. The exhibition is open until March 3rd, so if you haven't already, please get up. That's on our second level. Please enjoy that exhibition. The exhibition brings together new and recent projects by participants in the Bridge Artist in Residence program at MSU. This program has been a 3-year and continuing initiative connecting international artists with faculty and students across campus. Our speakers this evening, as I've mentioned, are Michele Root-Bernstein, Associate Professor of Creative Imagination in the MSU Department of Theater, and Robert Root-Bernstein, Professor in the Department of Physiology and in Lyman Briggs School of Science at MSU. Michele studies creative imagination across the arts and sciences with attention to thinking skills common to all disciplines. She is co-author with Robert on Sparks of Genius, the 13 thinking tools of the world's most creative people, and author of her most recent book, Inventing Imaginary Worlds. Together, Robert and Michele lecture and consult widely on thinking tools, creative process, polymathy, and arts as the fourth R in education. Michele is also currently leading a monthly haiku study group on campus with the MSU Center for Poetry. Robert's work concerns applications of the concepts of molecular and physiological complementarity to theories of evolution, molecular immunology, disease, and neurobiology. Robert has developed a new theory regarding autoimmune disease and the drugs used for their treatment. He also studies the process of scientific discovery and the methodological connections between the sciences and the arts. Robert's research includes nonverbal tools for thinking, such as pattern forming and recognition, abstracting, modeling, and visualizing. Robert has been a strong supporter of the Bridge Artist in Residence program, working closely with its director, Adam Brown, and the artists Marion Laval-Jeantet and Benoit Mangan of Art Orient Object, as they have explored the art and science of interspecies relationships. Their work, along with the other artists in the Bridge program, can be seen in the exhibition. Again, that's on our second floor. Those galleries are closed for the evening, but again, if you haven't seen them yet, please come back and enjoy those works. So I think that's it for me. I think we'll get on with the show here. We always try to leave a little bit of room at the end for some Q&A, so hold on to those burning questions you may have for Robert and Michele. And if there is time, I've heard there's a fun activity for us at the end to all participate in. So please help me in welcoming Michele and Robert.
Thank you. Thank you for taking time out from the Trump morass, the shutdown, and the wall. We're going to try and do something a little different here, which is to build bridges. And in this case, this particular bridge is not just any bridge. This is the Karopa Bridge in Australia. And we chose that for the opening slide here because it's actually started as a piece of artwork. There's a guy named Ken Snelson who invented a new form of sculpture called tensegrity. Michele will talk a little bit more about tensegrity sculptures later on. In this case, it actually has turned into a piece of engineering. So art, science, and engineering in one beautiful piece. Oop, that didn't work. Let's try this. Okay. So I want to start out with a story about 3 scientists who walk into a bar. Well, not really. They actually walked into a laboratory. They happened to be overheard by a guy named Mitchell Wilson, who was a graduate student at the time, which is important. The 3 men were all Nobel Prize winners in physics: E.O. Lawrence, Enrico Fermi, and I.I. Rabi. They were trying to figure out how to build the first nuclear reactor, running into all sorts of problems. So Rabi gets up and he writes a whole bunch of equations. He says, this is how to solve the problem. And so Lawrence said, no. Lawrence gets up and says, no, that's totally wrong. Erases everything he's done, writes a whole new set of equations, and says, see, this is the way it should be. And they all turn and then they look at Fermi, because Fermi's like the last man who knew everything that anybody ever wanted to know. And they say, what do you think? And Fermi says, no, you're both wrong. And they're like, okay, so why do you think that? And he says, intuition. Mitchell Wilson, the grad student, starts to laugh. And then he takes a look at Lawrence and Rabi, who are going, oh, damn, we're going to have to go back and rethink the whole thing. All right, so a whole bunch of equations proving they're right. Fermi says, no, intuition. You're all wrong. Intuition trumps all that formal knowledge. So even in science, intuition is something that's really, really critical. And what we'd like to show you is that intuition underlies a lot of the creative process across all different disciplines. I got really excited about hearing this story, which I heard when I was a graduate student, and started looking around to try and figure out what people meant by scientific intuition. And I came across a series of things. I'm just going to show you a few of the representative ones. Here's Max Planck, Nobel Prize for inventing quantum mechanics. This creative scientist needs an artistic imagination. What's an artistic imagination for a scientist? So Georges Urbain, he's a French scientist who discovered one of the elements, did lots of other major things. He was also a musician and a sculptor. These are some of his sculptures. The musician combines sounds in the same way that the chemist combines substances. It's true that the musician and chemist reason in their respective fields in the same way, despite the profound differences in the materials they use. Mathematician Mitchell Feigenbaum. It's abundantly obvious that one doesn't know the world around us in detail. What artists have accomplished is realizing that there's only a small amount of the stuff that's important, and then seeing what that is. So they can do some of my research for me. And he actually goes to art museums to try and figure out what artists are putting in or leaving out, so that as a physicist and a mathematician, he can figure out what to put in and what to leave out. Dorothy Crowfoot Hodgkin, Nobel Prize winner in chemistry. She said she learned how to see in 3 dimensions. Very important because she did her work in X-ray crystallography. So she has to see molecules in 3 dimensions. And she learned this by being taught how to draw symmetrical objects and then consider how they moved in dimensions. Robert R. Wilson, he's the physicist who built Fermi Lab in Batavia, Illinois. It's a very famous place. They've done really critical work. He not only designed the accelerators, but he was actually the architect for the building. He put up all the utilities, which are sculptures. He made sculptures that decorate the entire grounds. You can see him making one of his sculptures there. In designing an accelerator, I proceed very much as I do making a sculpture. So somewhere, this idea that the artist and the scientist are getting their ideas in the same way is really very basic. I kept reading and reading, trying to figure out, what is this? So this started out in my first book, looking at how scientists actually think. It's called Discovering. I would come home with these crazy stories about what these scientists were saying. You know, I actually become a neutron star to understand what it works like. What does that mean? How do you become a neutron star? And she'd say, that's really interesting, because I just read about this poet who becomes a tree in order to understand how to write about a tree or something like that. So eventually we realized we had to write a book, which became Sparks of Genius, about how scientists and artists are getting their creative ideas in the same ways. And we ended up thinking about these things as tools for thinking. And we realized what we were really dealing with in these tools for thinking was intuition. It's these kinds of thought that come before any formal symbolism, any formal language, that give us these new creative ideas, which we then have to somehow translate into something that we can show or tell or display to someone else. And at this point, I'm going to turn this over to Michele, who will tell you about these tools.
Okay. So because intuitive thinking is non-linguistic, it's difficult to communicate to others, to open up personal understanding for public discussion. If only we could mind meld like Mr. Spock. Absent that ability, however, we work at expressing ourselves in words or pictures or numbers or body movements or music and so forth. And there are some imaginative thinking tools that give us a vocabulary to discuss how we translate our intuition into these many languages. For our book, Sparks of Genius, Bob and I studied biographies and autobiographies of creative individuals, not only in the sciences, but in the visual arts and dance, music, literature, poetry, history, and other problem-solving disciplines and endeavors. And we found that creative people, regardless of their trade, all engaged in a common creative process. Well before arriving at words, equations, or paintings, they exercised a similar set of imaginative skills or tools for thinking that enabled them to think through problems, imagine possible solutions, and fashion effective innovations in human culture. So let's take a look at these tools. The first one I want to tell you about is observing, which means honing all the senses to perceive accurately and acutely. Georgia O'Keeffe looked carefully at things and forces us to do so too in her very large paintings of flowers. Still in a way, she said, nobody sees a flower really. It is so small, we haven't the time, and to see takes time, like to have a friend takes time. So how then would you observe this object? Certainly by using our eyes, but we need to remember that we have other senses too. Gerard Vermeer, blind biologist and author of the book Privileged Hands, A Scientific Life, observes seashells with his hands by touch as a sculptor feels his sculptures. There is simply no substitute for making one's own observations in the wild, Vermeer has said. Using his hands to see, he often discovers features that sighted biologists overlook. Our next tool is imaging, which means creating mental images of things observed or imagined using any or all of the senses again. Things that are not directly in front of us or we can't directly sense, but we can remember sensing or imagine sensing. Samuel Coleridge wrote a great deal about thinking in images in an 18th century sort of way. A whole essay might be written on the danger of thinking without images, he told a friend. Certainly this was his experience with the genesis of his great unfinished poem, Kubla Khan, which came to him in a dream in which, quote, all the images rose up before him as things, as real things. When Edvard Munch painted his Scream, he not only drew upon visual images of fear and pain, but upon body sensations and sounds of that pain as well. Precisely because we too can hear the emotion in what we see, as this cartoon suggests, Munch created a profoundly compelling image on many levels. Albert Einstein, the great physicist, had this to say about imaging: thoughts do not come to me in any verbal formulation. I very rarely think in words at all. A thought comes, and I may try to express it in words afterwards. He was indeed famous for his thought experiments. Here's a representation of an imaging exercise he performed when he was 16 years old. In his own words, quote, a paradox upon which I had already hit at the age of 16. If I pursue a beam of light with the velocity c, velocity of light in a vacuum, I should observe such a beam of light as an electromagnetic field at rest, though spatially oscillating. This feat of imaging contained the germ of the special relativity theory. Now, abstracting, our next tool, is a process of discovering simplicity in complexity by eliminating all but one essential characteristic. Picasso left us an excellent example of the abstracting process. All abstracting, he said, begins with something real and then proceeds by eliminating more and more elements. At the upper left, he begins with a fairly realistic bull, and then going left to right and then down, he explores which characteristics of a bull are most essential, and in the end, at the lower right, he decides upon a simple set of lines that suggest bull without actually saying it. The work of the Nobel Prize-winning biologist Nico Tinbergen demonstrates that scientists use the same abstracting process whenever they perform an experiment. In this instance, Tinbergen studied the behavior of the herring gull and noticed that the chicks pecked at the parent's beak to obtain food. What was the stimulus? Tinbergen made a cardboard model of a gull's head and presented it to the chicks. They pecked at the beak. So he now knew that smell was not the trigger. What happened if he changed the shape of the head on the model, its color, moved the red dot around, or left it off altogether? What if he simply presented the chicks with something red, like a pencil? In the end, Tinbergen discovered that pecking for food could be elicited by anything that was red. Red was the stimulus, and as such, it was like the ultimate abstraction for food. Okay, our next tool is recognizing patterns, which means perceiving similarities in structure or property among various things. The 16th century painter Arcimboldo was a master at concealing patterns for us to recognize. Do you see what he's up to here? See any patterns? Well, if you turn them upside down, so you see what he's hidden there, the facial pattern, which is something we recognize almost automatically. Okay. While looking for prehistoric flora and fauna, the archaeologist Mary Leakey and her team at Les Tolly in the late 1970s unearthed a bed of animal prints, rhinoceros, bear, and so forth. A few partial prints seemed different, however. Some of her team thought they might be hominid. After further excavation, enough of these unusual prints were found to make a determination they were in fact hominid. In fact, the pattern recognition confirmed that hominids had walked upright far earlier in prehistory than anyone had hitherto thought. Forming patterns, which is obviously connected to recognizing patterns, means creating or discovering new ways to organize or arrange things by consistently combining elements to reveal novel patterns. Whether implicitly or explicitly, all patterns have rules or constraints. Bridget Riley, who created this and other op art pieces utilizing optical illusion, made some of the rules that she used explicit. Consider this working drawing. Riley planned an orderly rotation of shapes by setting a series of 8 positions that oblongs will take within a circle. So note the 360-degree circle in the middle there, divided into 16 equal angles. If we take a closer look at her notes, we see the sequences or movements these oblong angles will take in 5 different rows, A, B, C, D, and E. According to the speed with which the oblongs in any particular row will mark out the path from vertical through horizontal and back to vertical, Riley labels the rows as slow, fast, very fast, or mixed. So there, I think it's A, the top one. It's going to go very slow because the oblongs are going to go through every single segment that she has, but other times the rows will move from one segment to the middle segment to the bottom segment, and that would be very fast. So finally, Riley consistently organizes her rows into a larger work, and in this simple, ruled manner, she achieves an interleaving pattern of restless lines and rectangular shapes that are more than the parts they started with. Swedish mathematician Helge von Koch invented the Koch curve in similar manner by systematically performing the same operation over and over again on a simple equilateral triangle. Note that the operation consists of dividing each side of a triangle, outlined in red there, into thirds, and then inserting a new triangle, outlined in green, in the middle segment of each side. The operation is repeated on each subsequent triangle ad infinitum. The result is an object with a finite area bounded by an infinitely long perimeter. This is called a fractal pattern. Fractal patterns preserve the same structure regardless of the scale of observation. Now our next tool, analogizing, means to discover or create functional similarities between structurally different things or processes. In his work, the sculptor Eduardo Chillida draws analogies to the biological processes of nature. Quote, "I can copy life, not the appearances of life, but life, the steps that life takes in evolving across time," end quote. By pondering the steps by which natural forms grow and change, he learns new ways to bring his sculptures into being. Steve Heidemann, a former MSU professor, and a colleague of his, Don Ingber, are two cell biologists with interests in sculpture as well as cells. As students, they were taken with the tensegrity sculptures by Kenneth Snelson. Remember that bridge? That's Ken Snelson's tensegrity. So they were very interested in what that architectural thing was, what tensegrity was. And in tensegrity, the tension of flexible elements acts upon inflexible ones to produce compression, and that compression stabilizes the piece. So you can see here on the left, the cables, or the strings, that look like strings, are actually metal, go through the struts, the solid metal parts, and by pulling the strings really, really tight, you hold everything together and stabilize it. So they were wondering, since they were cell biologists, it occurred to them that the cells might share the same architecture. What if? What if the cell functioned like a tensegrity sculpture, using the forces of tension and compression to hold together? The analogy led to discovery. The cytoskeleton of a living cell is composed of interconnected microtubules and filaments. Now our next tool, body thinking, means using muscle memory, physical feelings, gut reactions, and emotional states to recognize, organize, and address problems. Body thinking was of the utmost importance to the genesis of Auguste Rodin's famous sculpture, The Thinker. "What makes my thinker think," he wrote, "is that he thinks not only with his brain, but with every muscle of his arm, back, and legs, with his clenched fist and gripping toes." MIT-trained engineer Somer Gentry has used body thinking to get robots to interact responsively with each other. As an avocational dancer herself, she recognizes that it is one thing to make a robot that can mimic the individual motions of a human being, but it is quite another to invent robots that can respond to physical signs and signals as human partners do. Our next tool is empathizing, which means becoming the thing that you want to understand or recreate in a Zen-like integration of self and other. Again, Tinbergen, a Nobel Prize-winning ethologist, he was the one who used abstracting to discover why gulls peck for food. He also used body thinking and empathizing to think about other aspects of the gull's behavior. Tinbergen knew intuitively that moving like a bird puts you in their wings, so to speak, and in their world. Of course, one can also empathize with non-human things and inanimate things. Speaking of his sculpture core, Isamu Noguchi said, "Go ahead, put your head into it, and then you will know what the inside of a stone feels like." Now our next tool is dimensional thinking, and it's what we do when we alter our experience of space and time. For instance, when we alter the scale of things or the speed of change, or when we take things in one set of dimensions and reconstruct them in another, like when we map things from 3D to 2D. Dimensional thinking is thus at the heart of perspective in Western art, as we can see from this Dürer engraving of an artist using Alberti's veil, a gridded device systematizing the conversion of 3D objects into a grid, via a grid, which you can see in the center there, via that grid onto a two-dimensional surface. Dimensional thinking is also integral to origami. Physicist Robert Lang has pushed the art of origami in new directions. He is an origami master. He and others have also developed algorithms for understanding the science of origami, how to design such practical objects as self-folding maps, airbags, telescope lenses, and the stents used to open up clogged arteries. So now we're going to get into some compound tools that use some of the simple tools in tandem. And the first one is modeling. It's what we do when we represent a thing or a process in simplified or miniaturized analog form in order to teach or test or modify properties. For sculptor Henry Moore, modeling was an integral part of the creative process. First, he'd make little maquettes, and then a transitional larger sculpture, which you see him working on here, and then finally an outdoor sculpture, the final sculpture. At each stage, significant alterations would take place because, he said, the size of a thing changes our perspective. While modeling, Moore was combining tools such as observing and body thinking with dimensional thinking. So remember Mary Leakey and her team recognizing some dubious prints as hominid? Some of the footprints were over 12 inches long, which seemed like an impossibility for these really small, diminutive hominids. Leakey and her team tried modeling the trail by walking barefoot in the dust, slipping and sliding to elongate their prints. What was more likely, that two hominids walked one after the other or side by side? Does empathizing our way into the hominid's relationship help us understand the prints? For some time, the modeling was inconclusive. Now, another compound thinking tool is playing. Playing is doing something for the fun of it, without direct purpose. It's about breaking old rules and making new ones in order to test the limits of our understanding. It becomes a tool when it's understood as a strategy for developing skills, widening experience of the world, and generating novel responses to the environment. Take the games that the visual artist M.C. Escher played with reality. "My subjects are often playful," he wrote. "I can't keep from fooling around with our irrefutable certainties. It is, for example, a pleasure knowingly to mix up 2 and 3 dimensions, flat and spatial, and to make fun of gravity. Are you really sure that a floor can't be a ceiling? Are you definitely convinced that you will be on a higher plane when you walk up a staircase?" Now, because play can stimulate new behaviors and new ideas, it can often set the stage for discovery. Sir Alexander Fleming was a great player who combined both art and science in his many games. One of those games involved painting with a twist. As it says on the agar plate, this is not written with ink, but with bacteria that develop colors as they grow. So he was using bacteria to paint with. So he had to know what colors the different bacteria would be so he could use the proper bacteria to make the proper color. So in yet another twist, He might have been painting with these bacteria just for fun, but his play resulted in one of the greatest medical discoveries of all time. While collecting colored microbes for his palette, he came across a bluish-green Penicillin notatum, the mold that produces the drug penicillin. Not only did Fleming appreciate the mold's distinctive color, but because of his extensive experience with microbial interactions in his microbe paintings, he immediately recognized its pharmacological potential. He immediately saw that if penicillin is that big spot up there at the top, he immediately saw that the staphylococcus was dead around the mold, so he knew something was up. Okay, another compound thinking tool is transforming. Transforming is a thinking skill that binds all the other tools together into a functional whole. It means using other tools to think and imagine in a serial, integrated manner, so that you go from imaginative exploration of an idea to expressive fruition and communication. Paul Klee, son of a music teacher, thought he was going to be a professional violinist when he grew up, but he became an artist instead. One of his passions involved transforming music into the line and color of visual art. As a teacher at the Bauhaus in the early 1920s, he drew graphic representations of a Bach sonata, there on the left, in order to discuss, by analogy, the duration and intensity of notes as lines of tone. As the drawing on the right suggests, he also explored how to draw simultaneous voices or line notes in what might be called a linear counterpoint. By abstracting, Klee then rendered his line notes into pure lines, devoid of any reference to musical notation at all. As we see on the left, he drew 5 types of lines, each at a different angle, each a separate musical voice, to represent 5-part polyphony. And in his painting, Polyphony, Klee used color to express simultaneous musical voices in yet another way. Background color blocks simulate the deep bass chords of a musical composition, but then on the painting's surface, Klee superimposes tiny dots in different colors in luminous fashion, acting here like the counterpoint of Bach's polyphonic musical structures. You'll recall that Mary Leakey and her team were unable at first to model the footprint trail satisfactorily. Nevertheless, illustrators did their best to transform what might have been into a story of hominids walking through the mud, a volcano already beginning to spew the ash that would cover the prints and preserve them for posterity. Then a chance insight changed the story. On a visit to the Laetoli site, the nature photographer Alan Root suddenly recalled that he'd seen chimpanzees walking single file in each other's footsteps. Could the same be true for the Laetoli site? Might it explain the elongated footprints? Some renewed modeling confirmed the analogical hunch. Leakey now knew that the trail had been created by 3 hominids rather than 2, a large and a small individual walking side by side, a third trailing in the large one's footsteps, making some of them longer in the process. Finally, we come to synthesizing, the ultimate thinking tool. Synthesizing is the necessary consequence of transformational thinking, because the result of using multiple tools for thinking is that you know things in multiple ways. Oskar Schlemmer of Bauhaus fame expressed his ideas serially in a variety of forms: drawings, paintings, sculpture, dance, costume, demonstrating an integration of visual, spatial, kinesthetic, and material ways of knowing. More than that, Schlemmer placed himself and his art in an integrated realm of ideas, which comprised not just the techniques of painting or dance, but the principles of psychology and physiology and the larger demands of mind and body. His goal was to know things bodily, intuitively, sensually, and subjectively, as well as mentally, explicitly, intellectually, and objectively. This is synosia, to know what you feel and feel what you know. This is what creative people do. At the heart of all discoveries, inventions, and innovations, you find synosia and synthetic thinking. So let me give you a couple of examples. This may look like a piece of art, and it is. It is also a piece of science. It's an electronic chip. As such, it's a reification, a concrete representation of mathematical and logical operations transformed into patterns. These patterns are turned into 2 dimensions on a silicon wafer in a process derived from silk screening and etching. Art and science are thus fused. It's one of the best examples of a cynosic device that Bob and I know about, and most of us rely on it every day with our cell phones and more. And finally, synosia often leads to what I call world play. Children often make up imaginary worlds through complex play with ideas and things. Adults make up imaginary worlds too, when they create the alternate realities of fiction, the probable worlds of history, or the possible worlds of science. Simulating what makes sense to sensual forms of thinking, they intuit new ways of looking at the real world. Which brings us back to why we're here at the Broad, celebrating intuition as one of the intersections of arts and sciences. And that's a good place for me to turn things over to Bob once again.
So, if you don't know, there is a wonderful exhibit at the Broad right now called Matters Matters, or Matters Matter, or Matters, well, there are lots of different permutations here, which is the whole point. It's all about bridging research in the arts and sciences. It's on view until March 3rd, so although it's closed tonight, you should all come back. What I'm going to do is show you how these tools for thinking can be used to view this exhibit and help what for many people is a very complex set of pieces of art, give you a handle on how to look at them and feel them and sense them and so forth. But also, if you have seen them before, maybe give you an entirely new way to look at them. So one of the most accessible of the pieces, which has got lots of publicity, is Sissel Tolaas's Smellscape. So Tolaas went to Detroit, gathered smells there. I mean, literally, she sucked them into tubes and things like that. And then recreated them, and there's a whole wall full of them with little tiny cubes. And if you pick up these cubes and other shapes, the warmth of your hand will release the smells inside. So there's a whole bunch of really neat science there which has to be incorporated in order to work these things. She is getting you to observe in one of the senses we very rarely use, which is smell. We are so visually oriented, and particularly in museums, that seems to be, the focus of everything. And yet, we have these other senses which we very rarely use. In fact, there's very little art made from smell. Sissel Tolaas is telling us there are all sorts of opportunities here. Now, what doesn't become immediately apparent is how she made these pieces of art. And patterning is one of the key tools here, because in order to take these smells and make them for her artwork, she needs to go back, decompose these, find what the patterns of the different compounds are, and then recreate them in a form that she can display, in which you can use your hand to warm up and smell. So she uses very sophisticated types of chemistry, mass spectrometers and so forth, breaks these things down into their components, and then you can see behind her in these pictures, she has a huge library, if you will, of different compounds with different smells, and she takes these and then very carefully, through experiment, recreates them. So she finds the patterns and then recreates the patterns. Another one of the pieces is by Evelina Domnitch and Dmitry Gelfand, Hydrogeny and Camera Lucida. It's a really interesting piece where you have all these bubbles coming up and various forms forming in there. And again, imaging, transforming, lots of interesting tools going on here. What you're seeing are physics and chemistry being transformed into something visual which we don't normally see. Again, a huge amount of science behind this, but if you simply look at it as seeing what we don't normally see, being able to sense what we can't normally sense, you'll start realizing that this has a lot of similarities to much art. Much of art is about getting us to understand or sense what we do not sense. But here you actually get to see the transformations in action, which is very unusual in art because most art doesn't move, it doesn't transform, it doesn't change in any way while you actually experience it. Another one of the pieces by Helen Evans and Heiko Hansen, Man-Made Clouds. This is a video production. They actually have two different pieces in the exhibit. This one's kind of fun because you watch a little cars and planes and things like that swirling around. The cars run in and out of traffic. They look like they're going to get run over. They're all spewing these colored smoke things coming out the back. And the whole point here is to get you to actually see, again, what you don't normally see, which is we have all these exhaust devices that don't let us see what we're putting into the atmosphere. They want you to see that. They want you to imagine what these cars and these planes are really doing to the world. And by making it visible, we then can imagine by visualization what's actually going on with the cars. So it's fun, but it's also very serious. They also have Green Desert, which is a very interesting look at the algae blooms that are taking over the Great Lakes and occur in various other parts of the world as well. One of the pieces actually looks like the Great Lakes, parts of Michigan and Ontario and places like that, being taken over by the algae as they actually grow. So they're modeling, they're dimensionally changing this so that we can actually see what is so huge that we really can't comprehend what it's, again, doing to our environment. Bring it down to our scale, let you watch it in real time, and now you can start thinking about what this means for huge swaths of our environment. Marion Laval-Jeantet and Benoit Mangin have done another really interesting piece which gets lots of attention, May the Horse Live in Me. So this has a lot of empathizing and body thinking. Marion at some point decided she wanted to become a horse. Okay, lots of young girls would like to have a horse. Some of them probably imagine what it would be like to be a horse, but she wanted to go beyond that. Could she actually become one as much as it is humanly possible to do so? So she took two approaches to this simultaneously. One is something that's not all that terribly unusual. She built a set of legs so that she could get at the same height of the horse, move like the horse and things like that. Took a lot of ingenuity and so forth. The one that's really gotten everybody's attention, however, is in order to become the horse, even more than pretending to be like it, she got together with her husband who inoculated her with horse proteins. So they actually put real horse proteins into her so that inside her she was partially a horse. And then the experience of having what is actually a fairly dangerous procedure being performed on her, she said helped her to enter this state where she really got much more closely into being a horse than she would have in any other way. So this is a very extreme form of art, which combined a lot of immunology, a lot of empathizing, and clearly a lot of body thinking. Stellark has a piece. Stellark's piece has been fairly well publicized. You may have seen this elsewhere before. He has a third ear. And instead of putting the third ear like somewhere on his head, he decided he'd put it somewhere where he could talk to himself. So he put it on his arm. So he can now whisper into his own ear. He's been talking about actually implanting an electronic actual hearing device there and then having that linked in so that he literally can hear himself. Clearly this is playing. He's trying to get us to imagine why our bodies are the way they are, but more interesting, what could they be? Why are we limited to just the appendages that we have? Could we have other ones? Plastic surgery and so forth is making all sorts of things possible. So let's try that. And then, of course, there's lots of body thinking here because he's transforming his body into other forms. He also has a video that lets you get into that transformational process, which isn't all that pleasant, but it does get you to understand that this is not something where you just say, oh, this is fun, I'm going to play, I'm going to do this. He had to convince a bunch of surgeons to allow him to actually undergo this procedure, since it's not something that's going to benefit his health in any way, and any kind of procedure like this carries certain risks. This was not an easy thing to convince a surgeon to do. And then he documented the actual transformations that his arm goes through. So the body doesn't like this, and you have to sit there and look at it. So there's all this transformations in the body itself as it gets used to having this ear where there shouldn't be an ear. This is a way, again, of body thinking and transforming, which becomes very apparent when you start thinking about it that way. Zbigniew Oksuda has taken his art in a slightly different direction. One of the pieces here is Spatium Gelatium form 171018. He's actually made many different versions of this, not this many. It's basically a biological habitat. He uses lots of our tools, analogizing. The analogy here is he was thinking about the fact that all our bodies are completely made up of cells. The cells, in a sense, are a home. The cell membrane is a home to everything that's in there. It allows life to exist. So instead of simply having us composed of cells, what if we could live in a cell? What if we reverse the whole process and put ourselves inside of the cell, which allows us to live? So then, of course, there's the entire process of having to make a cell that size, which involves lots of dimensional thinking. Kuai Shen has a very interesting piece called Myrmecophilia. It's ant mimicry as a post-biological model for a resilient technology. There are various elements here, lots of little tubes connecting various parts of the apparatus. The apparatus itself allows the ants to move around and recreate the environment inside it. There are television monitors so you can watch this. There are speakers and microphones so you can listen to them. And so this turns out to be one of the most complex of the pieces that are out there in terms of our tools, because the person coming up and seeing this exhibit is, of course, asked to observe. You watch the ants running around. You see what they're doing. You notice various aspects of their behavior. Some of these form patterns. It's clear that many of the ants move only in certain directions and that they're only doing certain kinds of jobs and that they only move at certain times of day and things like that. You can spend literally weeks watching what's going on here. They are building their own world in there. And so they're transforming their environment to make it into something different. So this is one of the first examples where we really have a complete world play going on. Included in this are things where Shen wants us to experience things we wouldn't normally. So as the ants walk over little microphones, those are actually transformed into sounds that we can hear. I don't think I'd ever heard an ant move before. They just are too small, they make too little noise, but now you get to listen to them and listen for the patterns in those as well. Are they making music? Are they communicating? What's going on there? Finally, Tanya Duff has Wastelands. And basically, this is a series of videos and documentation of her making a biogas digestate in a glass biosphere that reimagines human microbe relations. Now, what does that all mean? What she's thinking about is the fact that we are polluting our environment. But interestingly, if we capture the bacteria and the viruses and the algae and the yeasts and all those things, and we create an environment for them, something that is on the same order as Shen, but even more complex, then we can allow our environmental neighbors to actually take care of all the pollution that we are creating. The problem with this piece from the naive viewer is it's so simple at one level you can't see what's going on here, because she has created an entire world, and most of the transformations that are required to do that, all of the bacteriology, the virology, the microbiology in general, the environmental sciences and so forth, are hidden from you. So you really have to imagine yourself into this piece, imagine it as an entire world, and then play with it. So it's synosia because it is everything. It's all your senses, it's all the sciences, it's all the art put together in a very beautiful way. So what we would like you to suggest to you is that you think of the tools for thinking that we've given you here tonight and experience the Broad in new ways. There actually are, we have suggested this in a number of publications for museums before. There's at least a couple in Oxford because we saw them doing this when we visited. They would actually hand out, see this particular museum by looking for patterns. Where do you see patterns in all the works here? Where do you see abstraction being utilized in the artwork? Where do you see people playing and how are they playing? Can you empathize? Where is empathy being integrated into the artwork? Or how does empathy allow you to perceive the artwork in a different way? So to help you do that, we're going to end up with a quick exercise, which will help you to think about how all these tools are actually present in almost everything and even the most simple objects that we see all the time. And I guess we'll hand those out now. It's a quick origami exercise. If you want to come up, you're not comfortable and you don't have any place you can fold like on a chair next to you, we can do it up here. There's some tables in the back there you can move to. But Michele will, or I guess I can start you off while Michele is handing these out. We're going to show you how a very simple exercise embodies everything we've been doing. So here's your piece of paper. I'll take one. I'll let you do it if you want to.
Okay. So how many of you have made a fortune teller at some time in your life? You know, or, yeah, that's what this is. So if you know how to make a fortune teller, if you know how to make a fortune teller, you know how to make this toolbox. So basically you have, I've cut off the end so you have your square already. So you're going to take that big square and make it into a triangle. And if you've done origami before, you know that you want to be as careful as you can to really make all the edges match up or the corners match up. And then you really make your crease nice and strong. So you can either move around and use it on a table, or as Bob said, maybe the chair, or maybe just free form, see what happens. So when you make one triangle, then you open it up again and make the triangle in the other direction as well.
That gives you the center.
Do you want to
the exact center of your...
Do you want to turn to the next one, Bob, the next slide?
Next slide.
So, okay, that's a little bit ahead of us. So anyway, now we have this square that we've done in both directions. And so what we have is a big square with fold lines intersecting in the middle, right? So with the printed side down, you're going to take each corner and carefully fold it into the center, just like the slide shows, basically. So you want that corner's point to really, really match up to where the two fold lines intersect in the center. And then you do it for each point. So 4 points, and you put them all into the center, and you're repeating the same operation. And by the way, as we make this toolbox, we're using all the thinking tools to make this toolbox.
Yeah, you might want to think about what you're doing. So, are you trying to figure out what the paper wants to do? Empathizing? What kind of patterns are we doing in the different folds? Are you copying somebody else? So you're observing. Maybe you're just observing the pictures. You're observing by listening to Michele.
So anyway, then if you folded all the corners in, then you have a smaller square. And then with those flappy things on the bottom, you're going to do the same operation. You're going to take each corner and fold it into the center of the square.
So we want to start with
yeah.
the 13 showing in the very center there, I guess. Yes?
Yes, exactly. Yep. So we're going to end up with a smaller square.
And this is the point where somebody goes, I can't stand it, and they throw up and then they walk out. We've actually had people do this about this stage. I have no idea what I'm doing. We hope that nobody is having that problem here.
So does everybody pretty much done that series of operations twice? So now they have the second smaller square. So then when you have that second smaller square, you just want to fold it into a rectangle and kind of really crease, just because you want it to be pliable. And you go in both directions to open it up and then make it, just crease it well so it kind of moves easily. And then you're ready to go from 2D into 3D. You have this 2D sort of object, and now...
So if you have fantasy, reason, experience, and emotion showing up...
the flaps that say reason,
you should be able to
fantasy,
see little flaps.
You kind of put your fingers, your thumb and your forefinger under those flaps and go from flat to this. So you have something that looks like that. Then you kind of crease that nicely, and you crease it again. And then, well, yeah, you go both directions. So you want a nice, pliable thing. Yeah. No, this direction. You want your flaps to be on the outside, so do it in that direction.
Yeah,
Hold on a second.
The women tend to be able to do this because they've done it once somewhere in their
You need to
past.
go in this direction.
So if you have it,
Okay, so reflap it that way. Yep.
you got it that way. Okay, so turn it over this way, and then these flaps.
Whoops, so you
Lift
did.
each
So
one
you have
up.
to do the same thing. I
Right,
maybe didn't
and
make that clear enough.
It doesn't initially want to do
go in that
this, but
direction first.
eventually you can make it.
Anyone having like significant what's going on here? Yeah.
So we want, let me see, you're
Excuse me.
folding.
Yeah, what happened is I probably wasn't, you probably did what on the...
Yes. Yep,
See,
so that's
this is what
becoming a
I
problem.
didn't
Yeah, so
make
fold them
super,
the other
super
way,
clear.
yeah, that way, and
This
then you'll
time
be
you have to
okay.
go this way.
And then these
So
will
just
become
fold
the
it in like
flaps
that, then you'll be perfect.
open it up this way. Finger pockets. Yep.
Yeah, let's see. Oh, you had a bum thing.
Scary to think that 5-year-olds do this all the
Yours
time
isn't
with no
gonna work,
problem,
'cause
right?
it's- this wasn't supposed to be there. I don't know how you picked that one up. Anyway, it was a square though, huh? I just maybe copied. I must have made a mistake then with some of them. So go in
Got
that
them.
direction.
Okay.
And then,
All right,
and then you'll have your
so
rectangle. Then
have
you'll
we
be like
gotten to
this.
there?
You'll have flaps on both sides, and
All
then
right.
you go like that.
So
and like
now
that.
flip it over,
Yeah.
and each one of these becomes a pocket.
How are we doing? Oh, you've got
Which it
yours.
will resist a little bit
Yes,
at
I think
first.
we,
So,
I
you know,
didn't
it's
make
easy to
something
get the
super
first
clear,
two open,
obviously,
and
that I
the
should
third
have.
one's a
So
little
that's the
harder.
problem. Oh, no, you're right. So
Yeah.
what you do is just crease that way, and then do it this way, and crease that nicely, and then you have these, you see, then you have these
This
flaps
is where having lots
ready
of good
for your
folds
fingers.
before you start doing this makes a lot of difference. If it's been well and
There you
tightly
go.
folded,
Well, you just were
it is
trying to do
hard
it
to
on the
do it
wrong
on your
side.
lap,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. So then, and then you can sort of, yeah, there you go. Making sense now?
so once you have this, it's sort of like the games you
almost
probably
there,
played when
see?
you were a little kid of,
Now you
put
have
your
these
name
flaps,
in
you
or
put
a
your
number
fingers
or
in.
whatever it is. And the fun part
On that
is if you
side
then
too,
look
and then
inside,
You'll go,
we have
you'll go
all
up
the
to it,
tools with their
and you'll
definitions.
get there. And see, you just had a one that
So
was
you can carry this around the
not cut
broad and you
properly,
can
so
say,
you don't
which
ha-
way am I
take
going to
mine.
see the broad today? Oh, I'm going to use empathizing. See the broad by empathizing. Next time you can go through and pick a different one. Oh, I got
me see how-
patterning. Things like that.
Let me see how are you doing, Bob? You're almost there.
In other words,
You're there.
play.
You fold it in this direction.
Pterodactyls. We could try that.
Then
Why
you've got
not?
these flaps ready to put your fingers in and push it up into a thing like this.
Yeah.
So I think what happened to yours is,
And you can go eat your sushi now.
yeah, you just have to fold it the other way. Usually it doesn't take, yeah,
guess we're ready
seriously,
for
seriously,
questions if
just
you
do
wanna-
it so, you know, and then
All
just
right,
do
so
the same things you did.
that's the end of our formal presentation and the play period. So we're open to questions. We can do this formally, informally, however you want to do it. But thank you all for coming. We enjoyed having you. We hope you enjoyed having us.
Don't worry about it. You